I have two guests with me this morning, and they are the co-authors of a brand new book that has just come out called Positively Fourth and Mercer, the inside story of New York's iconic music club, The Bottom Line. Allan Pepper, Billy Altman, good morning and welcome to WDHA.
Good morning.
Good morning, Jim. Great to be with you.
Alan, I'm going to start with you. There are two themes that go through the book, and one is love and respect. You can have the love of the musicians who play there or the respect of the musicians who play there. And also something that Stanley Snadowsky, your former partner, had said to you, music and business. How difficult was it to walk those two lines between love and respect and music and business?
Well, the love and respect a notion, which there's a meeting between Stanley and I, which is detailed in the book. Stanley came to me and he basically said, "We have a decision to make." And I said, "What's the decision?" And he said, "We can either be loved or we can be respected." And he said, "To be loved is very easy." He said, "All you have to do is pick up the tabs of everybody who plays here, all the important people, all the musicians, and let as many of their guests in as they want, taking up the seats of paying customers." He said, "That's great. Everybody in the business will want to play here. We'll have the most popular bands." He said, "Or we can, we won't be loved, but we can be respected, which means we set up a set of rules that everybody, no matter who, has to follow." He said, if we take the approach that we're going to be loved and pick up everything, it'll be great, but we won't have a business 3 months from now. He said, if we have the same set of rules for everybody, we may not be loved, but we will be respected, and ultimately we'll be able to run a business. So that was the line we had to walk. And to answer your question, it was very difficult because a lot of the artists and their managers and their agents did not really get what we were trying to do in the beginning. Ultimately, they did. Everybody grew to understand it and respect it. But he was right. We did get the respect of everybody because the headliners had to go to the same rules as the opening acts, or the opening acts had to go with the same rules as the headliners. So we were able to run a business for 30 years.
Billy, the book reads chronologically through the story of how Allan and Stanley came together, their friendship growing up in Brooklyn, through different business ideas that they had and putting different clubs and shows and what have you together. What was the process behind which you did the book?
Well, I knew Alan wanted to do it as an oral history. And he wanted to have a lot of voices in there. So as we were thinking about how to go about it, and it's also partially a memoir, it's also partially Alan's autobiography in some respects. So I think that from the beginning, it seemed to me that the only way that this could work properly would be by taking it chronologically. I've read a number of oral histories, and some are good and some aren't so good. But the ones that I've always thought have been good, like the Bill Graham book and some others that I've read, tend to go chronologically because you can have a chapter on, like, in other words, we have a chapter on Bruce Springsteen, but you could have all kinds of artists that played the club a lot and do little chapters on each of them. And I found that when I read those books, you lose the narrative and you lose the time frames because you're getting things jumbled up. He played in '78, then he came back in '84, and you're not sure where you are. And since the club was open for 30 years, there were so many changes in the music business and the radio business, as you know so well, that we saw that I saw certainly in terms of people that Alan was pointing me to and people that I wanted to interview that I knew I wanted to interview, that at different phases, people's stories come in at different points of the story. And so you have something like Bruce Springsteen there in 1975, and you have Dolly Parton there in 1977. You have in the 1980s, you have different people coming through one kind of music or another. You've got singer-songwriters come in, country music, all of these different trends in pop music that were going on at the time. So that made a pathway for us to be able to do it. And once I could see that pathway, fingers crossed, was going to work, things, fortunately, started to fall into place. really interestingly, I wanted to get back to what Alan said about separating the love and the respect. We have two great stories that I think of is what Alan was talking about was that it was a story that I think one of the stage managers perhaps told or whatever, that the opening act was complaining loudly about how they're going to have to pay for the food and have to pay for the drinks. And the stage manager said to them, look, they're treating everybody the same. Even the headliners aren't getting this stuff. And, that kind of made them, stop and think. And the other great one is a story that Alan told that when Darlene Love, the great singer, who we all know from all her great records that she played on the Christmas Baby, Please Come Home, which she does every year on TV or somewhere at Rockefeller Center, that the very first time she came to play the bottom line, she's backstage and she'd heard the cheesecake was good and she liked cheesecake. So she orders the cheesecake and coffee and finds out from the waitress that's delivering it, of course, that you're going to have to pay for it. And Alan walks in, and the first thing Darlene Love says, before she's even who she is, basically goes, hi, I'm Allan Pepper, I'm co-owner of it. Darlene just looks up and goes, hello, you're really going to charge me for the cheesecake? And they went on to have a wonderful relationship that Alan can speak to as a really nice thing about how you meet people and then the relationships develop. And so many of the artists that played at the club, that's exactly those relationships really developed.
I'm so glad you mentioned the
Jim,
cheesecake.
we were. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because I love the cheesecake at the bottom line. It was my favorite item that was on the menu. And the book even tells the story of how it got from one restaurant down to the bottom line. Alan, tell that story.
Well, this is one of my very favorite stories. Neil Sedaka was playing the bottom line for 3 days. And we get a call from his manager, whose name was Elliot Abbott, who basically said, look, guys, you got to let me out of the Sunday day because we have a date in Connecticut, which is paying us 10 times the amount you're paying us for the 3 days. And he said, so just let me out of this Sunday. We'll just do the Friday and Saturday. That was a time we hadn't been open that long. And the key for us was we wanted to be very professional. And we wanted consistency with the public. And we wanted the public to be able to trust us. So when they saw an act appear and they bought a ticket, they knew they were going to get that show without somebody canceling at the last minute. So we basically said, look, we can't do it. And Elliot was throwing everything at us to try and get us to change our mind. And finally, almost as a joke, in desperation, he said, look, guys, if you let me out of the date, I'll take you to any restaurant in New York that you want. And Stanley perks up and he said, any restaurant? And Elliot now realizing for the first time he's got an opening, says, Stanley, I'm a man of my word. Any restaurant you want, no matter what. Stanley says to me, puts Elliot on hold and says, how many tickets have we sold for Sunday? And I said, 4. And he says, gets back on. He says, Elliot, we may be able to do this, but you have to put into the contract that you're going to take us out to dinner. So fast forward, we've decided to go to the Palm, that great seafood restaurant, steak and seafood restaurant uptown, which we heard a lot about. And we've eaten and eaten and eaten, and we can't eat another. Well, let me say, I can't eat another.
Have we mentioned that Stanley loved to eat?
Yes.
Well, you're going to have to read the book to find out how Stanley had the 6th precinct deliver his lunch one time. That's a different story. But anyway, what happens is Elliot says, you guys, you have to eat the cheesecake before we leave. And I said, I don't know. Stanley says, okay, yeah, bring us a piece of cheesecake. So they bring the cheesecake and we start eating it, and Stanley, like his eyes are going to fall out of his head. He said, this is unbelievable. He turns to me and he said, we got to put this cheesecake on our menu. So, Jim, you have Elliot Abbott and Neil Sedaka to thank for the cheesecake on the bottom line menu. There are lots of little stories like that, but I wanted to get to something else. And then you have your own personal bottom line story that I want you to share with Billy, which is kind of referenced in the book. But let me just say one other thing. When Billy and I first sat down, we're trying to see if we would work well together. When you kind of sitting down with somebody you're going to enter a relationship with. It's like you're courting. It's like doing the dance, you know? And I said to him, look, the one thing that I really want, beside it being an oral history, is I want there to be the presence of two people in this book. I want Stanley, who's no longer here. I want his presence felt throughout the book, and I want my wife, Eileen, who is a muse to me and so much more throughout the book. And Billy has done a magnificent job in doing that. And I said, and I want there to be a narrative. I want it to have a beginning, middle, and end. I want it to be a story. I just don't want it to be a lot of humorous, funny things that happen at the club. Although there's a hilarious story about Dylan coming to see Muddy Waters. There's a phenomenal story about Sun Ra. There's a lot of stuff that'll make people. There's a great story about Meatloaf. There's a lot of wonderful stories in the book, but there's also a very human aspect, a real story that runs through him. Now, one of the people interviewed mentions that Eric Clapton showed up one night and he sat in and he played with Carl Perkins. And you're you're much a part of that story, Jim, which is not kind of elaborated in the book. So why don't you share with Billy so he knows the real ending of that story?
Well, Billy, I don't know how this came about, but I was playing in a band and somehow I had convinced Allan to book us. And Allan, I remember you calling me at the radio station and saying, Carl Perkins is coming in. Are you available for this date? You can open. I'm like, yeah, this is a legend. So we go down, we do our sound check, everything goes. And you know that the history of the Bottom Line is that the special guests are usually in the back. It's all paying customers up front. So radio, records, press, all of that, any celebs, they're a little farther away. Every night that I was at the Bottom Line, that's the way it was, except for this one night. I didn't play lead guitar except for one song. And I look down as we're about to start this song, and Eric Clapton is 3 seats away from me. I am not a lead guitar player, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm in big trouble. We go through the song, I do my little lead, I look down, and Eric Clapton smiles at me. I'm like, I guess I made it through.
You're a made man.
So we finish our set. It's in between us and Carl Perkins, and Eric Clapton's manager, bodyguard, somebody comes up and says, Eric wants to sit in with Carl Perkins. Can he use your guitar? So I'm sitting there, watching Clapton now play with one of my idols, Carl Perkins, and I go, oh, that's what that guitar is supposed to sound like.
A wonderful story. The beginning to that story is that he just showed up, as you see as we tell in the book, which happened a lot at the club. A lot of times you're surprise guests. And of course, you couldn't just walk into the club. You had to walk through the kind of a little bit around the bar to get to the backstage area. And the story goes that the person who was sitting at the box office, a cab pulled up, and Eric Clapton came out, maybe with one other person, and just came up to the box office, and he just wanted to know if Carl Perkins is going to come here for the Carl Perkins show. And it was like, oh my God, here's Eric Clapton. And of course, he was able to come in and claim, of course, without a guitar. But I didn't know before this that you supplied the guitar. Boy, that's man, forget it.
Right? I think I still have the strings he played that night. Billy referred to Bill Graham a little earlier, Allan, and Bill figures prominently in the book. He's mentioned numerous times. What kind of an influence was Bill Graham on you?
Well, the beginning of the book, which opens with just 2 quotes, standalone quotes on a page. Mine is, Bill Graham wanted to be Saul Hurok, and I wanted to be Bill Graham. And Stanley's quote is, everything is negotiable. If they tell you it's not, they're lying to you. So basically that kind of sets out, Graham to me was larger than life. And he was somebody he was a real role model. He was a real role model to me. And in the book, it talks about Graham telling me at one point along the way that the Bottom Line stage had become as important to New York as the Fillmore stage. And for me, you could get no greater compliment than that. Yeah, he was very important to me.
Billy, over the years, you've worked with the Rock Hall of Fame, the Grammy Museum, the National Blues Museum. Where does the Bottom Line fit into the history of all of this pop music, in your opinion?
Well, for me, the thing that was so great, as I said before, that the club bent with the times. In other words, and in New York, we throughout those years, and most cities have clubs that are kind of dedicated to a certain kind of music or a niche. And certainly in New York, and certainly when the Bottom Line opened in the 70s, and once you get towards the end of the 1970s, the early 80s, you had the punks would go to CBGB's, the disco people would go to Studio 54, jazz people would go to the Village Vanguard. If you want to see more cabaret, you might go to Reno Sweeney. There was all these different, and then you had comedy clubs. And from the beginning, Allan, as a talent booker and as a lover of music and as a presenter of music, Allan's tastes were always so eclectic, and he wanted to reflect that in how the club operated. So the club never had a scene like the people that hang out at the club all the time. The Bottom Line wasn't like that. Whatever act was playing that night or whatever the music was that night, that's what the Bottom Line was. So for me, as a music historian, having been involved with museums that have been fairly dedicated to certain things, but the National Museum, let's say, of African American music, we have galleries that have gospel music, they have jazz, we have hip hop, we have R&B, and we have all different kinds of music. And the Bottom Line for me always was a club. I mean, the story that I tell everybody, and since I went to the club almost from opening day, I wasn't there opening night, but I went to see Tanya Tucker, who at the time was 15 years old, and they couldn't serve liquor at the show. And Allan told me they had to consult the liquor, their attorney for liquor. We're going to get in any trouble for this. And then my last show is, I believe, a tribute to Dave Van Ronk, just about a month or two before the club closed in early 2004. But what I tell people is that going from night to night, you never knew what was going to happen because you just look at who was playing. And I distinctly remember in spring of 1977, I'm watching Lou Reed basically almost having fistfights with the audience. We recorded his Take No Prisoners album. And so Lou was being his curmudgeonly, outrageous best. And then literally the next night is the beginning of 3 nights for Dolly Parton's first solo shows ever in New York City. And in many respects, I keep telling people when I keep thinking about the Bottom Line, that's what I think of. One night, Lou Reed is there, and here's what the audience is like for Lou Reed. And then the next night, there's Dolly Parton facing the heavy-duty New York elites, and like it's a Broadway opening, and she's just charming the pants off everybody. So one night, you've got an audience where there's almost fistfights going on, and the next night is everybody's sitting there on their elbows just staring at Dolly Parton going, I can't believe how wonderful she is.
Bruce Springsteen figures into the story. Oh, go ahead, Allan.
No. You're going to give me. I wanted to make a point about the name of the book, but I can segue off of what you're about to ask.
Well, I was going to ask you about Bruce Springsteen because he does figure prominently in the book. He played there twice, once in '74, which was okay, and then of course 1975. And as I'm going through that story, Allan, I'm thinking, who put whom on the map? Was Bruce Springsteen and those shows putting the Bottom Line on a national exposure, or was those nights the night that broke Bruce Springsteen out on a national level?
That's such a good question to ask. That engagement has been credited with really breaking Springsteen because not only did he perform for 4 nights to a sold-out packed house with all the New York press there, but out of that engagement, he had got the cover of Time and Newsweek simultaneously, and so everybody credits that engagement with breaking Bruce. In this chapter. And Billy has done, again, a phenomenal job because if you read the chapter, you feel like you're sitting there in the room while all this is taking place. Because Billy got access or interviewed everybody from guys in the band to Bruce's original manager at the time, Mike Appel, to John Landau, who was his producer and now his current manager, to Sam McKeith, the guy who booked the date, to customers who were there. And a lot of these people talk about very specifically what happened to Bruce, what he took out of that engagement, and how it changed him. So in many ways, the club put Bruce on the map. On the other hand, the bottom line to me was not only a physical location where you could see music, it was the concept of how to present live music. And when you read the book, there's a whole chapter about, or part of a chapter, that tells some of our ideas and how we went about trying to do that. So although the bottom line had a buzz and everybody wanted to play it, Springsteen was unbelievable. And I was not necessarily a believer as a result of the first engagement in '74. He was interesting. Some of the songs were interesting. To me, as a businessman who was doing 2 shows, he was interminable. The sets were very long. I had to get in a second house. And I would walk around the club mumbling to myself, come on, Bruce, there's a second show to do. Come on. And then he had it all together. You know, in the first, and the book talks about this, in the first engagement, he came out in an undershirt, dark sunglasses, kind of almost like that James Dean, Marlon Brando, Wild One kind of thing. But in the second show, the one that broke him, he had figured it out. And oh my God, when he hit the stage, he was unbelievable. And I want to say to anybody who is listening to this show, everything that you've heard about Springsteen and that engagement is not hype. It's real. I mean, what he did was unbelievable. And so, because of what happened to him and how good he was and his ability on that engagement to fully realize his potential and what happened, he validated the club. He showed people what that club could give you if you were a performer and you had your act together and you had an immense amount of talent and you could you knew how to work an audience. He validated our concept. Our concept was great sound, intimate setting, great stage crew, all high production values in a little club. And boy, did he put us on the map. He put our concept on the map. And then the last thing, and then Billy can add to it, then I want to segue to one other thing. Keep in mind, my frame of reference was the 1974 early Springsteen thing. The first night of the second engagement, there's a line down and around the block. And I'm outside kibitzing with the first 2 people who've driven up from Philadelphia to see the show. And we're having a conversation, and they basically say, you know, we can't go and see any other live music. Bruce has ruined live music for us. And I said, what do you, and they said, in fact, the only exception might be the Kinks. And I said, what are you talking about? And they said, we can't see anybody else after Bruce. And I'm thinking to myself, boy, these people really need psychological counseling. and then I see the show, and I saw several nights, 2 shows a night, and I was blown away. And at the very end of the engagement, when he left, and the next act was about to roll in, I understood viscerally and emotionally what they meant. Because let me tell you something, we had a lot of really good people, but for weeks afterwards, that room, the atmosphere paled compared to what Springsteen had done. It was unbelievable. Billy, did you want to? I mean, Billy actually because of all the work he did. It's like I said, if anybody, if you buy this book, the Springsteen chapter alone, I've read it a dozen times, and I was there, and it still makes me feel I'm back in that room during that engagement.
Yeah,
Billy, did you want to?
Yeah, we were very, very fortunate. We were able to talk to Bruce, which was great. And he in his own autobiography, he spoke about how important those shows at the bottom line were. But then we were very lucky to have the perspective, as Allan says, people from all points of the compass on it. And what was fascinating, I think, in terms of your question, that we started with, is I think, like I said, the shows. There's no doubt Bruce has talked about those shows changed his career. But in terms of the club, as Allan has pointed out, it showed what could be accomplished at that club, and obviously it was a showcase for Born to Run when Bruce came to do that. He did basically the entire album. He was there. He did the entire album and walked on the table that I was sitting at, danced across the table. Thank God I didn't knock over my drink. but the thing was that I think, as Allan was saying, once Bruce established what could be what could be accomplished for an artist performing at the bottom line, when they had something to present to the audience, it turned into the showcase club. It was certainly the jewel of New York clubs in terms of anybody that had something new or something going on that they really needed to get across to an audience. And I've likened it because, back then I was a working critic and I sat in the back with taking notes with everybody else. And people from the record companies I interviewed for this book said, you realize that we all turned around to see if you guys were thumbs up, thumbs down. I said, we were just watching the shows, man. But okay. But over the time working on the book, I have come to realize that in many respects, playing at the bottom line was for music people and also for comedians and also for theater people and whatever. It was very much like a Broadway opening. You came to town and you now were it was opening night on a Broadway show. And I think the bottom line it was run so professionally that it always had that vibe. It's like, when Elvis Costello came in, or, when Trisha Yearwood came in. I'm just going across all these different years, artists like Buddy Miller, all through these time periods. Maybe you hadn't seen them in New York, and here they are now in the perfect place to see them. What do you got?
By way of a little background, Allan and I have known each other nearly 46 years. And Allan, it wasn't until I read this book that I went, yeah, he does look like the actor Robert Morse. I can't believe I never made the connection. And there is a story in the book about you. I guess you're a teenager and someone has recognized you, and you have to tell the story because you'll tell it far better than I. I can't believe I never recognized that resemblance.
When I was a kid, meaning in my adolescence, I had this resemblance to Robert Morse. I had been stopped in supermarkets and stuff like that, so it became amusing to me. And one day, I went with my parents to the Broadway show Take Me Along, which Robert Morse was in, and we left the theater. And obviously, someone comes over to me and they said, "Mr. Moore, can I have your autograph?" So I looked at them and I kind of looked around and I said, "Listen, I'm going to tell you something that I've told very few people. Robert Morse is not my real name. I'm going to sign this in terms of my real name." And I wrote, "Best wishes, Allan Pepper."
Somewhere
those
has that
people,
autograph.
somewhere somebody is thinking that they have the inside scoop. I wanted to go to one other place speaking about Springsteen because it's very relevant. Billy came up with the title of this book, positively Fourth and Mercer. And I actually wanted a different title, but Billy went out on this, and he absolutely was the right choice. It's a great title. Obviously, positively Fourth and Mercer was the address of the bottom line. The bottom line was 15 West 4th, which was the corner of 4th and Mercer. But I realized at a later point, once we were really into writing the book, that there was a much greater significance because in terms of musical history, that corner, the corner of Mercer and West 4th, is a very valuable piece of musical real estate. Billy, I think you should speak to it since you're the guy who came up with the insight.
Yeah, in I guess it was in 1962 or early 19, I guess in 1962, Bob Dylan played across the street where the original Folk City was. Of course, the great folk music club that Mike Porco ran, and Dylan, his shows at Folk City were the ones very historically that Robert Shelton, who was a music critic for the New York Times, that was the review that kind of put Dylan on the map, and ultimately, would lead to him getting signed in some respects to Columbia Records. So Dylan had played across the street, and here we are years and years later, and you've got Springsteen. So the Dylan shows at Folk City were historic, and it really helped put him on the map. And here now, in 1975, here's Bruce Springsteen, catty-cornered from that corner, and his shows helped put him on the map. So it's a piece of New York real estate, as Allan says, with a great amount of musical historical significance. So, I'm a newspaper guy by nature, and worked for many years at Cream Magazine, writing very irreverent headlines. So I'm good at writing headlines and titles, and we're trying to figure out a good title for the book. And after a while, I think I woke up in the middle of the night one night and I said, well, there's the Dylan song "Positively Fourth Street," which most music people know. Positively Fourth and Mercer, they'll get it, and I think most people have reacted really nicely to the title of the book.
And the book is called Positively Fourth and Mercer, the inside story of New York's iconic music club, The Bottom Line. Allan Pepper and Billy Altman, the co-authors of the book. I can't thank you guys enough for your time this morning. The book is a wonderful read, and if I really encourage my listeners, if you've ever went to a show at The Bottom Line, it's well worth. There's so many great stories in here, how the club came to be, and all of the artists who came there over the years. And thank you both for your time this morning.
Thanks so much, Jim.
Thanks, Jim.